I have acquired 2 books for the Women's Prize for Fiction list, starting with Memphis, and maybe moving on to this. Maybe I'll get a notification that some of the other books that I requested from the library are in stock. But yes, so far these are the 2 books that I am picking up for the Women's Prize for Fiction. I haven't even edited the video where I talk about which books I'm going to read yet. I'm going to do that tonight and hopefully it'll go up tomorrow. I have just finished reading Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, and really glad I read that book because I really enjoyed it. So I'm coming off of the high of a good book, which I feel I need, because I don't know that I'm going to love this book, or that I'm going to love many of the books on the Women's Prize for Fiction list. There is only one book that has really piqued my interest, so yeah, it was good to come off a really good book before I get stuck into this project. So I'm going to start with Memphis by Tara M. Stringfellow, and I will probably start this later on tonight, and then yeah, it will kick off this reading vlog. So I have finished my first book from the Women's Prize for Fiction long list, and that is Memphis. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I am laughing at myself at how much I really enjoyed this, because when I put up my video talking about the Women's Prize for Fiction long list and the books I was going to read, I actually cut out a lot of the things I said about this book, because I was like, I'm not going to enjoy it. I don't really like books that are set in the South America, blah, 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 blah. And now it's like, look who's laughing now. I really enjoyed this. Stringfellow is an amazing storyteller. This book felt so magical in some ways, but not like because it features tons of magical realism. It's just because of her writing. It's not super flowery, but it is quite flowery and very poetic. This book tells the story of 3 women in a family. So it alternates between different characters. So we've got Joan, August, and Miriam. Joan is the daughter of Miriam, and August and Miriam are sisters. And we've got Hazel, who is the mother of August and Miriam. And it essentially tells the lives of these women through the sort of struggles they have had through men, but not like in a really horrible way. Okay, in the case of like Miriam and August, yes, but in the case of Hazel, hers is very much a love story with her black husband, and you know, it then breaks down into the things that sort of trickle down into their family. I feel like that's a terrible explanation of it, but at the same time I'm like, that's very apt. I will say there are trigger warnings in this book for child rape. Like, it happens off page, lynching, just racism. Well, yeah, racism, but it's not so explicit in this, which I do like. And then just general sort of violence, like gang violence, domestic abuse. So there are a lot of trigger warnings in here, but it feels very soft. When you're reading about these things, you're like, oh my god, but it feels very soft. One thing that I thought was really interesting in this book is, with the trigger warnings that I've given between Miriam and August, there is a decision that these 2 characters make, which, it doesn't stun me, but I love the way that Tara has written about it, because it is the thing that would divide families, you know? And there is this sense of the fact that this very horrible thing happened. We are family, how are we gonna get through this? And obviously what happens in this book really is that Miriam reaches a crisis point with her husband, and she has to move back in with August. And they move back into the house that they grew up in, which is actually the house that their dad built. So that's actually a really nice touch, and there's lovely descriptions of the house and things like that. And it's reading a book like this that made me realise I could definitely never be an author, because like, having to describe houses or scenes and stuff like that, I'm not good with things like that. And a lot of the time in books, it's not the part that I enjoy. I really tend to skip over that, but her writing is so beautiful that I was just like, wow, I'm actually like picturing all of these things. It's like so vivid. Because this book spans like 3 generations, you get really important moments in history. So in the case of like what's her name, Joan's timeline, you get the 9/11, and you know, there's a whole sort of saga there with her dad. A lot of this, you know, it does focus around sort of like absent parents, but you know, domestic violence. But then there is also that wonderful love story of like black love as well. A lot of it is to do with sisterhood, to do with intergenerational trauma, and how you sort of like begin to pick up those pieces. I don't know if I've sold that very well, but I loved this book. Like, I am getting this is a library copy. I don't know why it hasn't got the library cover on it, but I'm getting myself a copy of this because I thought this was phenomenal. I don't know, her writing just feels like magic, and there's a character in this book called Miss Dawn, and the minute I saw her, like sort of heard of her and what she told Joan to do or something, I was like, I'm gonna like her character. I'm really sad that she doesn't feature as much as she does. She features nicely alongside all the other women, and I'm like, how long has this woman been alive for? Like, she feels like she is a character that is just like, I don't know, she feels like a witch, and I think essentially she is meant to be a witch. She was a lovely character. There's just this really nice sense of like magic running throughout this book. I don't know how else to explain it, but it's so nice. But yeah, so this is a library copy, and I'm gonna get myself a copy. I was gonna get myself a paperback version, but I actually prefer this artwork, so I'm gonna buy myself a hardback, which is fine because I can get it discounted at work. So I am now on to Cursed Bread. Can you see that? Yeah. I know I said in my, again, video talking about the long list that I probably actually would just flick through this and then be like, actually, I don't want this book. No, I didn't do that. I have started reading it because I thought, well, it's the only other book that I have from the library that is on the Women's Prize for Fiction list. The other books that I went to pick up are all, yeah, they're not on the Women's Prize for Fiction list. I think some of the other ones I have reserved are either in transit, as it says on there, or they'll probably be available tomorrow. So they might already be there, or, you know, also be in transit. So I decided I would read this. I'd read a couple of pages and see what I thought of it. If I didn't like it, then I could put it down. I have to say, it is okay. It's okay. Like, I'm not blown away, but I'm not like, oh my god, this is so boring. It's actually quite a very short book as well, so that was the other thing that sort of encouraged me to like give it a go. It's 181 pages, and I did read some reviews of this just so I could get a feel of it, like before I picked it up, so I could get a feel of it to see if I would like it. This is based on well, I say based on, it's inspired by a true story in the town of France where I think people were eating bread and, I don't know, it like put the town to sleep. But this, I think, definitely features a lot more to do with like, it's about the woman Elodie, right? And there's a woman, Violet, that moves to her town, and I think she's just a bit obsessed with her. So I think this is a bit of like kind of, well, yeah, she just sort of longs for her. This woman is clearly the alluring person in her life. She's talking about her life with her boring husband. The woman, Violet, that has moved in also has a husband. And I think it's just about their little interactions of just like, I don't know, come hither and all that sort of stuff. So far it is actually just quite meh, but not in a really terrible way that I'm like, this is so boring. It might pick up pace. I feel like because of the style of writing and the type of character that we have, it's not going to pick up pace in the way that I want, but it's not too bad at the moment, and I do feel like I could finish this by like Tuesday or something, and then I could just like send it back and be on my way. Hello guys. So I am now reading Stone Blind by Natalie Haynes, and I am on page 88, and all I can tell you is this book is goddamn boring. This book is boring because I'm guessing it's setting the scene. I'm hoping it's setting the scene. However, what is making this book boring is there is so many characters. There are so many perspectives. Every 2 pages, you are literally sitting with a different god, goddess, gorgon. I don't even know. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, but for the average reader, okay, I don't know who this book is aimed at. I don't know if this book is aimed at people who love reading Greek retellings. Then, of course, they're going to know who these gods and goddesses are, and they're going to know a bit of their backstory. For me, who doesn't know that, you don't need to bring these 10,000 characters because it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't really matter. At the beginning, there is a list of characters, right? And this list is one page, is nearly 2 pages long. At first when I saw it, I thought, oh, how helpful. It's not helpful because some of them are not even like listed in this section, so you're just like, okay, I don't actually know who that is. And it's not helpful because why are there so many characters? Why are there so many chapters from the perspectives of different characters? Why? Maybe I'm finding that out later because it seems she is building the story, like coming to the story of Medusa. However, what I have heard already about this book is it doesn't really actually feature the story of Medusa that much, so I'm thinking it's still going to feature all these side characters and perhaps they're the ones telling the story. and I don't like it. Honestly, I'm reading this and I'm thinking, if I wasn't reading this to like, you know, try and read the women's prize for fiction, I would have just stopped reading this book, because like I said, I read 1,000 Ships by her and I didn't think it was anything special, right? And I'm reading this and it's just, the chapters are too short to get to terms with who the characters are. And then by the time you've sort of gotten into one person's story, you're moving on to another story. So then you're like, oh, okay. So far, I'm actually really not enjoying this. What I will say is I went back onto my library's like system and found some more of the other books on the shortlist that weren't originally on their system when the long list was announced. So now The Bandit Queens is there, so I've reserved that, and I've also reserved I'm a Fan. I said in my you know, sort of what I'm reading from the Women's Prize video that I didn't think I would read that, or if I had spare time I would read it. However, I was in my work office the other day and people were talking about that book, and one of my colleagues was talking about it. She actually said she didn't really like it, but when she described it to me, I was like, do you know what? I actually want to read that because it sounds a bit more fiction-y. At the time when I read the description of it on the Women's Prize for Fiction page, I was like, this sounds like a book that should be a non-fiction book, but it sounds like a book I could enjoy, so I've also reserved that. I think out of all the ones that I spoke about and thought maybe I'll read, those were the ones, aside from The Marriage Portrait, but I don't think I'll be reading that until like I've definitely finished the definitely finished reading the ones that I said I wanted to read. So good for me, I don't have to buy The Bandit Queens, I can just hopefully reserve that. I was pretty sure I reserved the Demon Copperhead one, but when I was looking through my sort of reserve thing, it wasn't on there, so I've reserved that again as well. And yeah, that's where we're at. I really don't want to read Stone Blind, but I'm gonna read it. And it's not like it's a tedious read or anything like that. There are some books sometimes when I don't want to read a book, like I really just don't want to go back to it. Whereas this, I'm just like, what is the point in any of this? Like I don't understand where this is leading to, so I just feel a bit like I just don't want to read it for that reason, rather than being like, oh, I really don't want to read it. I'm just like, what's the point in this? So there's the update. Hi everyone. Hopefully this doesn't keep, well, I don't keep hitting it during this last bit. So I finished reading Stone Blind yesterday. I just returned it to the library because it was actually due back yesterday, but I wasn't here, so I couldn't return it. And also I basically finished editing this vlog and realised that I didn't actually talk about Cursed Bread in the end, as in when I finished it. So I'm going to talk about those two here and wrap this up. So I ended up finishing Stone Blind and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. So in that clip when I was talking about, how many times am I going to say so? But in that clip when I was talking about the fact that it had so many characters, it still kind of continued to do that, but you know, it kind of stripped away some of the excess characters. And as I suspected and was saying, it really was about like setting the scene. A lot of this, you know, when people talk about it not featuring Medusa, they are correct. It is a story that is told around Medusa because it is about framing that context for why these things happen to Medusa. So in that sense, the story actually does make sense, because if you told it from the perspective of Medusa, you would just get a story that's filled with loads of anguish and pain, but then you wouldn't really know why, you know? So in that sense, I understand the framing of the story, and I actually did end up enjoying it a lot more because I found out so much more about her story that I didn't know. So definitely really beneficial. I think what actually stopped me from enjoying it as much was really all the issues I was complaining about in the beginning. I felt like the beginning was really drawn out. I like I said there, I completely understand why she did it, but I think it just went on for a bit too long in terms of all these other extra characters. There were so many other stories at play which do feed into this, and I think perhaps, you know, even as I'm saying this, I'm realising that perhaps actually the story is probably a bit larger than that. There's probably other moving parts that also have a knock-on effect on like Medusa's story, which she probably had to strip back. But for me, for someone who doesn't know the story, doesn't really know a lot of like Greek myths and things like that, it felt like so much information dump at the beginning. Eventually, you know, we all see how it pans out and we hear from all the different characters. So essentially what I found out about Medusa, and what I will say about in terms of like having Medusa in the character and giving her a voice, she does have a voice. She has a voice in the sense that when she is Medusa, she has a voice, and then she has a voice when she is the statue that, you know, is turning everyone into stone. But because I'm terrible at pronouncing Greek names, I'm just going to say it and pray for forgiveness. But, you know, it all stems around from and it's one of those things where it just, again, like I said, with knock-on effects, these things happen to Medusa because someone wants this and someone wants that and someone wants this. But essentially the main story is about Perseus or something, someone like that, who wants to save his mum from marrying a king. And the king says, okay, won't marry your mum if you bring me the head of a Gorgon. And Medusa is a Gorgon. And so that is essentially why this whole thing happens. And I really like the sort of framing of how we saw Perseus, or whatever his name is, because I don't know if in other stories he is framed as a hero, but obviously in this particular story, because of what he set out to do, it's essentially what, you know, it's not what caused the destruction of Medusa, because she was already cursed by the goddess, but, you know, turning her into some sort of killing machine or a monster is like kind of his doing. So that is essentially the main story. There are other bits where we learn about how the gods help him to do that, and we also hear about like how Medusa meets her mum and how that goes, and then there's just like all these other little side stories that play into it. But the main story is about this man and his quest and how he wants to save his mum from marrying someone that he doesn't want her to marry, also that she doesn't want to marry, you know. So that's the story of Medusa and Stoneblind. So I think Stoneblind was a good book. Whilst it is a good book, I worry that the book was chosen because of its sort of morals, you know, what it leaves you with, you know, the sense that obviously, yes, Medusa wasn't a monster, she was cursed and all these sorts of things. And, you know, it's the story of men using women to inflict violence upon people and making her into a monster when that's not who she was. And I completely get it, but I wonder if it's that impact of this woman wasn't a monster, like these people need to know, rather than the actual like written contents of the book and how do we feel about the book. I thought it was a fine read, but it wasn't spectacular, it didn't blow me away. But I also think that I need to think a bit more wider in terms of what Greek retellings actually involve, and having to strip so many things back in order to create a story, but also a story that flows very well and also can be read by a general audience. So I'm kind of conflicted in 2 points. I'm just thinking about the overall list, and just kind of when I was reading the blurb of some of the books, just sort of what the themes were, and I really feel there is a sort of strong theme there of, you know, redemption of women. I mean, it is a women's prize, so it's completely fine, but it did make me think, like, is this the best book that was chosen, or are we basing it on the sort of story that it leaves us with after? Who knows. So talking about Cursed Bread is a book that I gave 2 out of 5 stars. In all honesty, I spoke in my what I'm reading video about like how I wouldn't like it because of the book that I'd read before from Sophie McIntosh, blah 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 blah. This book was nothing like that, thank God. This book was actually slower to get into, and I didn't really like it because I found that nothing happened, but I wasn't irritated by it, and I think that for that I am very, very thankful, because when I read her other book I was so irritated by it. I was honestly ready to chuck my Kindle out the window, whereas with this it was much slower paced, and I was just a bit like, I just don't really care about these things. So Cursed Bread ended up being about Elodie and her sort of obsession with this new woman that moves to the town. I think it's like she's not the mayor's wife, she's like the ambassador's wife or something like that, and essentially she bloody fancies her, yeah. But you know, they're in this small town, and you know, she has a husband, like Elodie has a husband, and also the ambassador's wife, obviously she's the wife of someone, and so it is about, you know, how they spend time together, how sort of enchanted she becomes with her. But we're also going back and forth in the chapters to sort of post the event of the cursed bread, so post the event of, I guess, the poisonous bread that drives everyone mad. The post-event stuff is really just Elodie recounting on like things that have happened, and then we're going back into like the actual time of the story and the actual timeline of things happening. Really not much happens. She just kind of follows Elodie around, spends days waiting for Elodie, just thinks about the ambassador's wife and all these sorts of things. And then we get to this final sort of like, you know, 3 courses of the book where everyone is getting poisoned by bread and everyone's going a bit mad, and there are just loads of like chaotic things happening, and amongst that Elodie discovers something that, you know, is essentially going to tear her life apart if this bread incident didn't do that. So who knows which outcome was better for her. Yeah, so I didn't really have many thoughts on that book. It's not the kind of book that I would usually read. It's not really the book for me, but I can see how it can be a bit enchanting to people and how people would like it. I can see some of its charms, but for me personally, the kind of reader I am, I just found it quite boring. So that will conclude this part of my reading vlog for the Women's Prize for Fiction. I think I've got 2 more weeks until the shortlist is announced. However, I don't have any of the actual Women's Prize for Fiction books at the moment, because the ones that I have reserved at my library, they haven't come through. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to have to wait to see which ones come through, and then hopefully some of those will be in the shortlist and I can continue, but I'll continue reading the books anyway, and then talking about them. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this. Reading vlog. Let me know if you have read any of these books and what books from the Women's Prize list you are planning to read, and I will catch you in another video. Bye.